The current debate between two significant public figures who both also happen to be former Navy SEALs, Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw and podcast host Shawn Ryan, goes much deeper than just what the headlines are focusing on. Now, if you're not familiar with what's been going on since early December 2025, Congressman Dan Crenshaw's attorneys sent a cease-and-desist letter to podcast host Shawn Ryan, telling him that he needed to stop referencing Crenshaw in some of his online interviews, specifically related to possible questions related to funds and monies that Dan Crenshaw was earning. Shawn Ryan then responded in a very public way using his media platform, highlighting that he not only didn't do anything wrong, but then also shared previously private media clips of Crenshaw saying very inappropriate things in public, referencing violent actions against other media professionals, namely Tucker Carlson. With Shawn Ryan's public disclosure of the previously private legal documentation that was sent by Dan Crenshaw, many voices in conservative media have really picked up the story to move forward with it. And the predominant question here is whether or not Dan Crenshaw is overstepping as a political figure, trying to silence an independent media voice. At least that's what people are focused on. But I'm seeing something very different between these two men, and that's what I want to share with you today. Whether or not Shawn Ryan was right or wrong, whether or not Dan Crenshaw is justified or not, is kind of irrelevant to me, because the larger question that we should be asking is a very different question. I already know this conversation is going to piss off a lot of people. It's going to piss off Navy SEALs, it's going to piss off CIA officers, but it has to be said, because what you're really seeing in the debate between Shawn Ryan and Dan Crenshaw is a complete breakdown of the myth that you have come to expect of Navy SEALs. Elite groups have benefited for many decades off of media, portraying them as something better than they really are. Whether that's Navy SEALs or CIA officers or FBI agents, TV and movies have made you believe that they are somehow above silly human behaviors. Like Navy SEALs are always the best of the best, and CIA officers are always discreet and quiet, and FBI agents are always professional and straightforward. But in reality, we're all just people. And the cultures that we live within are these falsified, fractured, fabricated cultures are designed to brainwash young recruits and teach them to believe that their bond with each other is actually stronger than their bond to the American people themselves. Think about that for a second. That means that hundreds of millions of Americans have come to believe that certain elite services, like Navy SEALs, like CIA, like FBI, have been dedicated to the American people, when in reality, their internal culture makes them more committed to each other than to the mission itself. That's exactly what I'm saying, and that's what you're seeing happen in this conflict breakdown between Dan Crenshaw and Shawn Ryan, who are both former Navy SEALs. This might come as a surprise to you, but it's no surprise to those of us who have served in these elite agencies, because we understand that there are actual names for that connection that we have with each other, that camaraderie that takes precedence even over our promise to serve and defend the Constitution of the United States. Navy SEALs call it the brotherhood. That bond between each other that supersedes all other things. CIA call it the alumni group. That bond that we have with one another that guarantees that we will protect and cover one another to keep ourselves out of trouble. FBI calls it the partnership, that bond between agents that promises that they will back each other up no matter what happens. Inside these organizations, that culture is beyond question. So far beyond question that each of these three organizations actually create their own internal feedback loop where they criticize and condemn members of their own group who go out and make success for themselves outside of the organization itself. So every famous former Navy SEAL that you can think of, every former famous CIA officer that you can think of, every famous former FBI officer that you can think of, all had to pay a reputational price within their organizations themselves in order to become public figures. It's not accepted, it's not allowed, it's not celebrated, and it's not known to the average American that this culture even exists. Most of us are accustomed to the fact that we like to celebrate each other's successes. The people you went to college with, the people that you played on the same sports team with, the people that grew up in your neighborhood. When you see them succeed, you celebrate them, you congratulate them, you're proud of their accomplishments. But it's actually exactly the opposite in each of these cultures that are known as quiet professionals. As a quiet professional, you're expected to carry out your duties quietly. You're not supposed to celebrate your victories. You're not supposed to take any credit for your good decisions or your good actions. You're supposed to go on and carry out a very high impact life with zero recognition. That's the foundation of the culture that drives the Navy SEALs, CIA officers, and FBI officers. This idea of being a quiet professional. And if you are not quiet, about what you have accomplished, then the assumption is you are not a professional at what you have done. So inside the Navy SEAL culture that both Dan Crenshaw and Shawn Ryan came from, they were brainwashed to believe that all of their sacrifice, all of their duties, all of their actions came second, not to the American people, but to the brotherhood between the Navy SEALs themselves. You really see this play out in the story behind how Dan Crenshaw found out that Shawn Ryan spoke about him in the first place. According to text messages that both men have published publicly, Dan Crenshaw was having a conversation with his boys at Team 6, SEAL Team 6, when they mentioned to him that Shawn Ryan had commented about his finances on Shawn Ryan's show. As a result, Dan Crenshaw then reached out directly to Shawn Ryan, referencing the boys at SEAL Team 6 as the source of his information. So think about that for a second. So what that means to me is that there are members of SEAL Team 6, active duty SEAL Team 6, who are sitting around watching videos of the Shawn Ryan show. And as they watch those videos, they make certain notes of comments that Shawn may or may not say, and then they farm those comments out not to other active duty Navy SEALs, but to former Navy SEALs. Is it just me, or does that seem like a silly way for current Navy SEALs to be spending their time? But here's the crazy thing. This isn't the first time I have seen this happen. I have worked with other members of the Navy SEAL teams, including Navy SEAL Team 6, who went out and said something publicly only to find out that a group of people sitting at SEAL Team 6 observed their public disclosure, whether it was a magazine article, whether it was a YouTube video, whether it was an interview on TV, and then reached out to condemn that member. I want to take a minute to thank today's sponsor, Telescope Innovations, ticker symbol TELIF. During the heart of the COVID pandemic from 2020 to 2021, the whole world suffered under the weight of the shutdown of Chinese manufacturing and Chinese supply lines through their domestic ports. This was an epiphany for American industries that realized they had become reliant on Chinese supply chains rather than independent or even diversified outside of China. The wake-up call that came from COVID-19 wasn't just about developing a new vaccine, it was also about developing new automation and new scalable technologies that would make it so that the United States would never again be caught by surprise during a global pandemic caused by a foreign country. That's where companies like Telescope Innovations, ticker symbol TELIF, come into play. Consider that in today's world, it takes 30,000 experiments to create one new useful drug. The modern skilled chemist can complete 5 meaningful experiments in a week. 6,000 weeks later, we have access to one new drug. You can see how that timeline does not lead to long-term medical independence for the United States. Even if you triple the amount of human chemists, you're still getting a new drug every 2,000 weeks. That's an incredibly long time frame to create something that's so critical to national security. Telescope Innovations has actually created a fully automated medical lab that can complete more than 900 meaningful medical experiments in a week. That cuts down the time needed to create a new drug by 3,000%. As if the time it takes to create a drug isn't impressive enough, you have to also consider the cost. In today's world, it takes approximately 3 years just to discover a new drug. And then it takes another 7 years and almost $900 million to develop and bring that drug to market. That means that when an American pharmaceutical company discovers a new drug and invests in taking that drug to market, it only gets about 10 years of profit-generating time selling that drug. After that, the drug becomes a generic and profit margins are nearly lost. But using the new automated medical lab created by Telescope Innovations, that timeline would get shortened by 3 full years, and costs would be reduced by almost 30%. I know it sounds like sci-fi, until you consider the people behind the scenes. The team that makes up Telescope Innovations includes 2 Nobel Prizes, 34 independent patents, and more than 450 peer-reviewed academic publications. 15 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world already work with Telescope Innovations. They have no significant competitor, and they've already partnered with a leading global distribution company to make sure their products reach the world. Telescope Innovations, ticker symbol TELIF, is truly at the crossroads of where AI, robotics, and medical technology meet. You don't have to listen to me. You can look this company up for yourself, and I encourage you to do so. Telescope Innovations, ticker symbol TELIF. I've even seen wounded combat veteran SEAL Team 6 members who retire with accolades and praise from the SEAL teams. Within 1 year of leaving service, they have been outcasted by the very same Navy SEAL Team 6 unit that they belong to, their own brotherhood, turning a cold shoulder on them because of something they said publicly. This idea that there's some kind of secret police, some sort of HOA that sits at SEAL Team 6 and decides which SEALs retire and get to stay in the Brotherhood and which ones don't get to stay in the Brotherhood, sounds to me like this idea that the American people aren't the primary people being served by the unit. And when you see this conflict between Dan Crenshaw, who is a public figure serving the American people, and Shawn Ryan, who is a public figure serving the American people, and you see this conflict between the two of them that originates from SEAL Team 6, a unit that neither of the two men even belong to, it is absolutely insane. In this case, it's very clear that the public spotlight is shining bright on the Navy SEAL community, a community that already understands that this culture of the quiet professional is broken and backwards and upside down. There are countless numbers of former Navy SEALs who finished BUD/S and went on to have very successful careers who left the service early. And they left the service early because they realized that what they were promised when they started their BUD/S training is not what actually exists after you complete BUD/S training. It's very similar to what happens with attorneys and doctors and other people in federal government like CIA and FBI. You go in believing that something is true, and then only once you're inside does the culture teach you that what you believed is false, that you have to put politics and you have to put loyalty and you have to put other priorities in place above what you swore to protect and defend when you took the oath of office. That is exactly what we're seeing play out right now between Shawn Ryan and Dan Crenshaw. They're so focused on the public debate that they're not realizing they're showing the seedy underbelly of this culture of the quiet professional that Navy SEALs hold so dear. But why does any of this matter to you? Why should you pay attention to what's happening in the debate between these two former Navy SEALs? There's actually two reasons. First, this very public debate speaks to the growing distrust of government that we're seeing all over the country, both on red sides and on blue sides. You're seeing that public trust is not only degrading in institutions, but also in individual units. Because if you can't trust the promise that Navy SEALs are quiet professionals, then really what can you trust about Navy SEALs? Are they really as great as everyone says they are? Is the training really as elite as we all believe it to be? Is the Brotherhood really so tight that people want to be part of it? I would say that what we're seeing right now with the public debate shows that it's not everything that we've been told it is. The second reason is even more important because what we're seeing are two individuals who are so closely aligned in background, but they represent two completely different versions of future leadership. Here's what I mean by that. If you look at just their backgrounds, Ryan and Crenshaw are really quite similar. They became Navy SEALs within just a few classes of each other. They never aspired or made it to Navy SEAL Team 6, and they both left military service early. Shawn Ryan separated early to go join CIA's GRS, Global Response Staff. Dan Crenshaw left early because he was medically retired after being wounded in combat. But from that point, their trajectories completely transform. Shawn Ryan goes on to build a platform and an audience using new media, YouTube, Spotify, podcasting, and from that builds a very strong conservative following where he becomes a leading conservative voice, ultimately even leading the interviews with the current president himself. Dan Crenshaw, on the other hand, follows a very traditional political path, coming from a leading university, Tufts, going into the military, and then ultimately leaving the military to start a career in politics. That is a path that is tried and true that you and I have seen played out dozens of times before by leading political figures like Bob Dole, John Kerry, John McCain, George H.W. Bush. And now we're seeing it with Dan Crenshaw himself. Shawn Ryan, on the other hand, is following a totally non-traditional approach. Not an approach that has never been followed before. We've seen other former Navy SEALs break into celebrity fame, people like Jocko Willink, people like David Goggins, but we've never seen anyone reach the height that Shawn Ryan has reached using new media. So now these two individuals who started so similar to each other have both reached pinnacles in their professional careers that really show that they are different than anybody else in their near peer group. And the question that you and I should be asking is who's going to win? How is this going to play out? Is new media and podcasting and public profile going to be squashed by government politics, bureaucracy, and favor? Or are we going to ignore the complaints of the political voted figure in favor of the politically connected new media voice? Somebody is going to win this argument. This debate is not going to go away. We're going to either see a cease and desist letter that gets enforced, or we're going to see a cease and desist letter that gets completely ignored. Either way, it's going to tell us which force is going to be more powerful in our future, politics or publicity. That's why I think it's so important that we pay attention. You don't have to have a dog in the fight. You don't have to think that Shawn Ryan's right or Dan Crenshaw's right, but you do have to pay attention. It is worth watching because in this SEAL versus SEAL debate, we're seeing things that we've never seen before, and we're getting a peek into the future that lies ahead of us. I'll be watching, and I'll be sure to share anything I find interesting with you, and I'll see you on the other side.